Claire Benson was the woman everyone in Westhaven thought they knew, and Hannah Benson was the sister everyone thought they understood. But when one was found brutally murdered and the other stood accused under a cloud of witchcraft rumors, the quiet Iowa town discovered that nothing and no one was as simple as they seemed. Westhaven was the kind of town people drove through without ever stopping. Tucked between endless cornfields and gravel back roads, it looked like a picture of safety and simplicity. Rows of white farmhouses with wide porches stood quietly under the summer sun, and every neighbor knew not only your name but your family history too. It was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and borrowed sugar from the house next door. Outsiders would never have guessed that beneath this calm surface, a darker history lingered, whispered in hushed tones after church services or around kitchen tables late at night. For decades, stories had circulated about strange happenings in the countryside surrounding the town. Some spoke of symbols carved into the wood of old barns, markings no one could explain. Others remembered tales of strange fires starting in the fields without reason, or livestock found mutilated in ways no animal could have caused. The older residents swore that generations ago, settlers had practiced witchcraft here, leaving behind a curse that still haunted the land. Most laughed it off as silly folklore, the kind of ghost stories told to frighten children, yet the rumors never disappeared. They clung to Westhaven like smoke, invisible in the daylight, but impossible to ignore when night fell. Life moved slowly in this part of Iowa. Children played baseball in the park, farmers worked their long days in the fields, and teenagers loitered at the single gas station after school. But when the sun set, a quiet unease settled over the community. Few liked to admit it, but most avoided walking alone on the back roads after dark. There was a superstition that the woods held secrets, and while many claimed not to believe, their behavior suggested otherwise. People hurried home, locked their doors, and let the stories live on in silence. In the summer of 2012, the air felt heavier than usual. It was a season of relentless humidity, the kind that made the nights suffocating even with windows wide open. Whispers seemed to carry more easily that year, and old rumors about witchcraft resurfaced in conversations that hadn't touched on them in decades. It was almost as though the town itself sensed something was coming, though no one could put their finger on what. Farmers reported hearing strange noises in the distance, echoes that didn't sound like machinery or animals. Some claimed to have seen shadows moving at the edge of the cornfields. Others found crude symbols painted on fence posts, though no one admitted to putting them there. In a place where gossip traveled faster than the wind, suspicion became a quiet companion to every conversation. Though most residents dismissed the tales as nonsense, a seed of fear had already been planted. And it was this backdrop of superstition, unease, and whispered legends that set the stage for a crime so brutal and shocking that it would forever change the town of Westhaven. Long before the police sirens and flashing lights arrived, before reporters swarmed the streets, and before grief settled into the bones of the community, the stories had been waiting. All it took was one act of violence to turn rumor into reality. Claire Benson was not the type of person anyone expected to become the center of a nightmare. At 42, she lived a quiet life in her farmhouse just outside of town. Her days were simple, filled with the rhythm of ordinary routines. She worked part-time at the Westhaven Library, where she was known for recommending novels to teenagers and helping older patrons track down genealogy records. In the evenings, she spent hours tending to her garden, her hands always covered in soil as she trimmed her roses or grew herbs in neat rows. To most, Claire was a kind but reserved woman, the type who waved politely at neighbors but never lingered long for small talk. Yet beneath her calm exterior, she carried interests that many in Westhaven found unusual. Claire collected old books, especially those that touched on herbal medicine, folklore, and the history of witchcraft in Europe and early America. Some of the volumes were rare and worn, their pages filled with strange illustrations and unfamiliar symbols. To Claire, they were simply a window into forgotten knowledge, but to the people around her, they painted a different picture. It was not long before neighbors began whispering about her fascination with such topics. In a town where church on Sunday was a cornerstone of life, her interest in the occult made her stand out, and not in a good way. Children sometimes dared each other to sneak near her house at night, claiming they saw candlelight flickering in the windows or heard chanting drifting from the barn. Adults weren't much kinder, giving her the nickname the Witch of Westhaven. Claire never responded to these rumors. She ignored the whispers and carried on with her life, burying herself in her books and her garden. But every cruel word, every suspicious glance, was quietly building an image of her in the community. An image that would later shape how people explained her death. On the morning of July 14, 2012, that quiet existence shattered. Claire S.'s body was found inside her barn by a delivery driver who had arrived to drop off a package. The scene was unlike anything Westhaven had ever witnessed. She had been beaten and stabbed multiple times, her body left in a grotesque position. Around her were strange chalk markings on the wooden floor, arranged in deliberate patterns that looked like symbols from one of her books. Candles, burned down to stubs, surrounded the area, their wax pooled across the dusty boards. News of the discovery spread like wildfire. In a town that prided itself on safety, the brutality of the murder was almost impossible to process. The sheriff's department immediately cordoned off the property, but rumors raced faster than the investigation. Some insisted Claire's death was the result of a ritual, proof that witchcraft had finally taken root in Westhaven. Others argued it was staged, a cruel act meant to disguise the real motive. What no one doubted, however, was that something unspeakable had happened, and the shadows that had always clung to the town had now taken form in the most horrifying way. The murder of Claire Benson shook Westhaven in ways the community had never experienced before. Fear settled over the town like a heavy fog, and it seemed that every conversation circled back to the same subject. At the diner, at the church, at the grocery store, people whispered about what had been done to her, their voices low but their eyes wide. Parents kept their children closer than usual, and neighbors who once left their doors unlocked began checking their locks twice before bed. It was not just the violence of the crime that unsettled everyone, but the strange, ritualistic details left behind in the barn. The chalk markings and burned candles ignited the community's imagination, and soon the rumors about witchcraft, which had once been nothing more than local folklore, were treated as undeniable truth. The sheriff's department tried to control the panic, but with every passing day, the tension grew worse. Reporters arrived from outside towns, eager to spin the story of a witch murder in the middle of rural Iowa. News vans lined the roads and cameras pointed at Claire's farmhouse while investigators worked quietly in the background. Residents, unaccustomed to such attention, grew defensive and suspicious of each other. Every glance seemed to carry hidden meaning. Every odd habit was suddenly re-examined. Fear made people look at their neighbors not as friends, but as potential suspects. At the same time, unsettling events began to occur throughout the area. A farmer reported that 3 of his goats had been found dead, their bodies arranged in a disturbing pattern. Another family claimed that candles had been left burning in their field during the night. Though police found no proof that these incidents were connected to Claire's death, they fueled the fire of speculation. The stories spread faster than any official report, and before long people were convinced that a cult was operating in Westhaven. Investigators, however, saw a different picture. When they dug into Claire's personal life, they discovered she was not as solitary as she appeared. Records showed she had been involved in disputes with neighbors over property boundaries. More troubling still were whispers about a romantic relationship with a man who was already married. Such details complicated the case, shifting it away from the idea of a purely ritual killing and toward the possibility of a personal motive. The symbols on the floor could have been a cover-up, a distraction designed to throw suspicion away from someone close to her. Despite this, the townspeople clung to their fears of witchcraft. Some claimed to have seen shadowy figures moving near the woods at night, while others spoke of hearing unearthly sounds carried on the wind. Whether these accounts were born of truth or imagination hardly mattered. They deepened the community's conviction that something sinister had taken root. For the people of Westhaven, the murder was no longer just about a woman's tragic death. It had become a symbol of everything they feared but could not name. And as investigators struggled to untangle rumor from fact, the lines between superstition and reality blurred more with each passing day. The investigation reached a turning point when weeks passed with no clear suspect, and the community's patience began to wear thin. Pressure mounted on the sheriff's department as state authorities stepped in to assist. Forensic teams combed through Claire's farmhouse, barn, and property again, collecting anything that might have been overlooked. Fingerprints, hair strands, fibers, every detail was scrutinized. Yet the chalk symbols and candles continued to dominate public discussion, overshadowing the more practical evidence. Investigators were forced to consider whether the ritualistic staging was a clue to the killer's identity or a calculated attempt to confuse them. The break came in the form of an anonymous tip. A caller insisted that Claire's younger sister, Hannah, should be investigated. At first, the claim seemed fueled by small-town gossip, but when detectives reviewed Hannah's background, they discovered troubling details. The sisters had once been inseparable, but in recent years they had drifted apart. Financial troubles plagued Hannah, and she had repeatedly asked Claire for money. Witnesses recalled overhearing arguments between them, with Hannah leaving Claire's house visibly upset. These small pieces began to form a larger picture, one that investigators could not ignore. When police searched Hannah's modest home, they uncovered items that raised further suspicion. In her desk drawer lay sticks of chalk, the same brand used to create the markings in the barn. A notebook filled with sketches of symbols, some identical to those found at the crime scene, was discovered beneath her bed. To the officers, the evidence appeared damning. It suggested not only a familiarity with the imagery, but a potential link to the murder scene itself. Hannah was brought in for questioning. Under pressure, she admitted to copying the symbols from one of Claire's old books, claiming she had always been fascinated by the strange designs, but insisting they had no real meaning. She denied any involvement in the murder and argued that her financial disputes with her sister were personal, not violent. Her story cast doubt, but the timing of her actions and the items found in her possession kept her firmly in the spotlight. The community reacted with disbelief. Some saw Hannah as the obvious suspect, convinced she had staged the crime scene to make it look like witchcraft and distract from a family feud. Others pitied her, believing she was being unfairly targeted because of her eccentric interests. The divide deepened tensions in Westhaven, creating an atmosphere of mistrust that reached far beyond the Benson family. Investigators prepared to move forward with charges, but doubt lingered. Something about the case did not fit neatly into the theory of a jealous or desperate sister. The brutality of the murder, the staging of the barn, and the sheer violence of the act seemed disproportionate to a sibling quarrel. As prosecutors assembled their arguments, forensic results were still pending, and many wondered if the truth was more complicated than the story being built around Hannah. What appeared to be an open and shut case was beginning to feel like only the surface of something much darker. Just as prosecutors were preparing to take their case against Hannah to court, a crucial piece of evidence shifted the entire investigation. Forensic analysts returned with the results of DNA testing taken from beneath Claire Benson's fingernails. The samples did not match Hannah or anyone in her immediate circle. Instead, they belonged to a man who was not from Westhaven at all, someone with no known ties to the Benson family or the small Iowa community. His name was Thomas Riker, a drifter with a long record of burglary and violent assaults stretching across several states. He had spent years moving from town to town, staying in abandoned buildings and living off what he could steal. Detectives quickly retraced his movements. They learned that Thomas had been squatting in barns and empty houses scattered across rural Iowa in the weeks leading up to Claire's murder. He had been spotted once by a farmer who dismissed him as a passing vagrant. Investigators discovered makeshift bedding, discarded food wrappers, and evidence of small fires in a barn just 2 miles from Claire's property. Slowly, the image of an outsider moving silently around the edges of Westhaven came into focus, a shadow the town had never noticed until it was too late. When officers tracked him down, Thomas resisted arrest but was eventually taken into custody. During questioning, his story unraveled. He admitted to sneaking onto Claire's property one night, planning to steal tools or supplies from her barn. But Claire discovered him, and in a panic, he attacked her. The brutality of the murder was not the result of a ritual, nor of a family feud, but of a desperate man caught in the act of theft. The symbols on the floor, the candles, and the eerie staging had been a calculated distraction. Thomas confessed that he found the books in Claire's home after killing her and copied the symbols to make the crime look like witchcraft. He wanted to create confusion, to ensure that suspicion fell anywhere but on a wandering stranger. The revelation stunned the town. For weeks, neighbors had turned against one another, convinced that witchcraft or family betrayal was at the heart of the crime. Hannah, once viewed as a likely killer, was cleared of all charges, though the damage to her reputation remained. Many could not look at her the same way, remembering the rumors, the accusations, and the notebooks filled with symbols that had made her an easy target. She became a ghost in her own community, living under the weight of suspicion even after her name was cleared. Westhaven struggled to return to normal. Some residents felt relief knowing the murder had not been the work of a cult or a secret ritual, but others found little comfort in the truth. The fact that a violent drifter could appear from nowhere, commit such a savage act, and nearly escape justice left them deeply unsettled. The whispers about witchcraft never fully disappeared either. Even after the case was closed, some swore that Thomas's staged symbols carried power beyond his understanding, as though he had unknowingly tapped into something that had always lingered in the shadows of Westhaven. For Claire Benson, the tragedy was that she had lived quietly, only to be remembered through the violence that ended her life. For the town, the lesson was harsher still. Rumors and fear can twist reality, blinding people to the truth that danger does not always come from the stories passed down through generations. Sometimes it comes from the stranger no one notices until it is far too late.